What happens when the most powerful military force on Earth decides to send a message, not with words, but with war machines? What happens when massive aircraft carriers, floating cities filled with fighter jets and missiles, are moved across oceans, not for war, but for intimidation? And what if the man they were trying to scare didn't react at all? No panic, no warning, no submission. Instead, he did something that shocked everyone watching. Who is this man? Why did global powers suddenly focus their attention on him? And what exactly did he do that made the world rethink everything? Because this isn't just about military power. This is about defiance. The world has always been controlled by signals, not just speeches or diplomacy, but movements. When powerful nations want to send a message, they don't always speak. They act. Ships move, jets deploy, troops reposition, and nothing sends a louder message than an aircraft carrier. These aren't ordinary ships. They are symbols of dominance. Massive floating fortresses carrying thousands of personnel, advanced fighter jets, and enough firepower to influence entire regions. When one appears near a region, it raises eyebrows. When multiple carriers move strategically, it becomes something else entirely. A warning, a reminder of power. In recent years, global attention has been shifting toward Africa, a continent rich in resources, but also increasingly central to global competition, not always through open conflict, but through influence, economic pressure, political leverage, strategic positioning. Different global powers have been playing their game. Some invest, some negotiate, and some intimidate, because controlling a region doesn't always require invasion. Sometimes all it takes is fear, and then, suddenly, a name started appearing in discussions. Ibrahim Traoré, a young leader, unexpected on the global stage. He didn't look like the typical politician shaped by international expectations. He didn't speak in carefully filtered diplomatic language. He didn't move like someone seeking approval. There was something different about him, a sense of certainty, a refusal to follow the usual script. And when he rose to power, subtle changes began to appear. At first, they seemed small, easy to ignore, but slowly the pattern became clear. This was not going to be business as usual. The global system is built on predictability. When pressure is applied, leaders are expected to respond in familiar ways. They negotiate, they compromise, they align themselves with stronger powers to maintain stability, because resisting pressure from global superpowers is dangerous. It comes with consequences, economic, political, sometimes even military. So when signs of pressure began to emerge, most observers expected the usual outcome: silence, adjustment, compliance. But then something else happened. Movements were noticed, not loudly announced, but visible enough for those who were watching closely. Military assets began shifting. Strategic positions changed. Patterns that experts recognized immediately. Aircraft carriers. To some, it was routine military movement. To others, it was a calculated signal, a display of force designed not for immediate conflict, but for influence. Because when these carriers move, they don't just travel across water, they send a message. We are here, we are watching, and we can act if necessary. The world started paying attention. Analysts began discussing possible outcomes. Media narratives started forming. Experts debated what this meant and where it could lead. Was this just a show of strength? Was it a warning, or was it the beginning of something bigger? History had shown this pattern before. Pressure builds, tension rises, and eventually leaders bend. But this time, something felt different, because while all eyes were watching, Ibrahim Traoré did nothing. No immediate response, no public reaction, no sign of concern, and that silence became the most powerful response of all, because powerful nations expect engagement. They expect acknowledgement. Even resistance in a controlled way is part of the game. But silence breaks the pattern. It creates uncertainty. Days passed, and the tension didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. The pressure remained, hanging in the background like an unspoken challenge. And then, just when many expected him to step back, he did the opposite. Instead of showing caution, he made a move. Not a defensive move, not a hesitant one. A bold move, a move that caught observers off guard. Analysts who had predicted compliance were forced to rethink their assumptions. The narrative began to shift. Because he wasn't reacting to pressure, he was changing the game. Instead of focusing outward, he turned inward, strengthening internal systems, rebuilding structures, shifting priorities in a way that suggested something deeper. This wasn't about immediate confrontation, this was about long-term. And what happened next was something no one expected, because instead of reacting to pressure the way most leaders do, Ibrahim Traoré chose a completely different path. He didn't confront power with noise. He didn't respond with threats. He responded with action, quiet, calculated, and deeply strategic. While the world was watching the oceans, tracking military movements, analyzing every signal coming from powerful nations, Traoré shifted the focus entirely. He began turning inward, but not in fear, in preparation. Decisions started being made, not loud, not dramatic, but impactful. Policies began shifting. Priorities changed. The direction of the country started moving away from dependence toward self-control. And that's when things started to feel different, because this wasn't a reaction anymore. This was a transformation. For decades, many African nations had been tied into systems that made them reliant on external powers. Economic structures, security arrangements, resource management, all interconnected in ways that limited true independence. And breaking away from that? That's not just difficult, it's dangerous. Because those systems aren't just economic, they are strategic. And anyone who challenges them becomes a problem. But Traoré didn't slow down. If anything, he accelerated. Instead of aligning himself with traditional power structures, he began exploring new partnerships, different alliances, relationships that didn't follow the usual pattern. And this is where the tension truly escalated, because global influence isn't just about who has the strongest military. It's about who controls relationships, who controls access, who controls the future. And when a leader starts shifting those dynamics, it sends shockwaves. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one country anymore. This was about precedent, because if one nation successfully steps outside the system, others might follow. And that's something powerful nations cannot ignore. So the pressure didn't disappear. It evolved. Narratives started forming. Criticism began appearing. Questions were raised about leadership, decisions, direction, the kind of pressure that doesn't come from warships, but from perception, because influence works in layers. Military presence is one layer, economic pressure is another, but controlling the story, that might be the most powerful of all. And yet, Traoré didn't step back. He leaned further in. Instead of softening his approach, he doubled down, strengthening internal messaging, reinforcing the idea of sovereignty, making it clear, not just through words but through actions, that his direction would not change. And that's when something remarkable started to happen. People began noticing, not just within his country, but across the region, across the continent, and even beyond, because leadership like this stands out. It breaks patterns. It creates questions. Is this the beginning of a new kind of leadership? Is this sustainable? Or is it only a matter of time before pressure becomes too strong? The world didn't have answers, but it was watching closely, because for the first time in a long time, someone wasn't playing by the expected rules. And that changes everything, because global power isn't just about strength, it's about predictability, the ability to anticipate how others will react. And when someone becomes unpredictable, they become difficult to control. That's what made this moment so significant. It wasn't just about military signals or political decisions. It was about a shift in mindset, a refusal to operate within boundaries that had existed for decades. And whether people agreed with it or not, they couldn't ignore it, because it raised a bigger question, not just about one leader, not just about one country, but about the future. What happens if more leaders choose independence over alignment? What happens if fear loses its effectiveness? What happens if influence no longer guarantees control? These are questions that don't have easy answers, but they are powerful enough to change the direction of global dynamics. And that's why this story matters, because it's not just about aircraft carriers. It's not just about political tension. It's about something deeper. It's about the moment when someone looks at overwhelming power and decides not to be intimidated, the moment when silence becomes strength, The moment when action replaces reaction, and the moment when the balance, even slightly, begins to shift. But here's the reality. This story isn't finished, not even close, because decisions like these don't just create change, they create consequences, some visible, some hidden, some immediate, and some that take years to unfold. The world will continue to watch. Some will support, some will criticize, some will wait to see what happens next, because moments like this don't happen often, and when they do, they leave a mark. So the next time you hear about military movements, global,